Hi, third grade, and welcome back to reading. Today is a deliverable day, so I can't wait to hear about all of you who use the skills that you're going to learn in today's video to secure that 3, if not that 4, on your deliverable task for today. So just like earlier this week, we're going to continue with our close reading of Through My Eyes by Ruby Bridges. And we're going to answer the question, who is Ruby Bridges? And what can we learn from her life, especially about this new chunk of text we just started with on day 1. So if you're ready to get started, let's sit up and go. So we know that close reading is the act of deeply and purposefully reading and then rereading a text to uncover what the text says, how the text works, and why the text is important. We also know that good readers read closely by reading and then rereading each section, annotating each section for big ideas, considering the author's purpose, and then asking why the text is important. And building on to this understanding, we also discussed that you as third graders have gotten really great at steps 1 and 2. Now, we're going to sharpen our skills when it comes to steps 3 and 4. So that we can get deeper with our analysis so that you're ready for 4th grade. And we know that when we read a text closely, we can unlock the messages or the big ideas that an author wants us to learn. So let's continue to closely read this text. But first, I want to see who was paying attention. Who can name the steps? How do we read closely? And also, bonus points for friends who can tell us what those 2 steps are that we're going to be focused on for the coming weeks. Go ahead and shout it out. Good job, scholars. We know that good readers read closely by using the 4 steps on the screen. And shout out to those of you who remembered that we're zooming into steps 3 and 4, and we're making sure that we consider the author's purpose and that we also ask why the text is important. So let's see who's going to do that work today. So today, we're going to focus on the same chunk of text that we read for task 1. But in this chunk of text, we're going to think about how Ruby feels or thinks about, that means her point of view, when it comes to the white individuals in the text that she discusses. So we're going to think about Mrs. Henry. We're going to think about Ruby's perspective or point of view when it comes to John Steinbeck. We're going to think about how she feels about the Gabrielles and the Foremans, white people who crossed the picket line so that they could send their children to school with Ruby. And we're also going to think about those white segregationists, the racists, like the cheerleaders outside of Ruby's school who yelled hateful things, and also other racist segregationist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. So we have to remember that when we make an inference about an autobiography, we always have to consider the author's point of view. So we're going to think about how Ruby viewed these white individuals in her life. Let's take a look at your task. So reading task 2 is juicy. Okay, so let's read it together. It says that you're going to reread pages 24 to 35 of Through My Eyes by Ruby Bridges, and you're going to annotate Ruby's point of view towards white individuals. After you do that, you're going to answer this following question in perfect race. Let's read the question. In these headings of the text, Ruby discusses a number of white individuals and their role during these first days of integration. Some of these white individuals include John Steinbeck, Mrs. Henry, the cheerleaders, the Gabrielles, the Foremans, and the Ku Klux Klan. What is Ruby's point of view towards white individuals in this part of the text? Provide 2 examples from the text to support your thinking. So scholars, when it's time for you to answer this question, I know you're going to do a thorough question analysis and mark it up and code it so that you can have the most perfect answer. But right now, I just want to highlight some parts that I really want you to pay attention to as I show you how I think about the first section. So first, just the page range, 24 to 35. Really zoom in to what you should be reading. and also the fact that we're thinking about Ruby's point of view towards white individuals. I also want you to keep the big question in mind, as well as the fact that you're going to need 2 examples from the text. That means 2 strong pieces of evidence with context, okay? So here we go, scholars. Let's get started with what a passerby wrote. So we already read this chapter together, and I have our annotations from last time up on the screen. Right now, I want you to press pause and reread this chapter just to remind yourself of what our big idea was. Go ahead and reread. Great job, scholars. And you'll remember that our big idea for this chapter had to do with the fact that John Steinbeck and also Norman Rockwell were these artists, right? This writer and this artist who painted pictures, how they were inspired by Ruby Bridges's life and these experiences that she went through as a little girl, and that they put her experiences into words in the form of Steinbeck's book, and also into art in the form of Norman Rockwell's painting, so that we could look at it years later and learn from it. So we've already got a couple pieces of evidence. There's one other piece of evidence that really struck me in this chapter, and I think it's going to really help me figure out how Ruby feels about John Steinbeck. Because remember, our race response asks about her point of view. It asks about her what, scholars? That's right, it asks about her point of view. So I also want you to underline this piece of evidence from the text. It says, the press tried to protect us. This is when she's talking about the fact that Steinbeck and also other reporters left out her name when they saw how intense and hateful these protesters were, these white segregationist protesters were, towards Ruby and the other girls who desegregated McDonough School. So I think when we think about all of this, and we think about that juicy caption that we read, that excerpt from Travels with Charlie, I think that Ruby feels that John Steinbeck actually empathized with her and cared about her. So Ruby appreciated that Steinbeck wrote about her in his book. And she knows that Steinbeck thought the segregationists were wrong. And you can see this in the words that he used and the fact that Ruby doesn't really use any language to describe him in a negative light. So this is how I think Ruby felt about one of the white individuals in the book, John Steinbeck. I want to see if you can continue to closely read this chunk and consider Ruby's perspective and purpose in writing these chunks. And then I want you to ask, why is this part of the text important? So scholars, it's time for you to do deliverable task 2. You're going to reread pages 24 to 35 of Through My Eyes. Then you're going to think about Ruby's point of view when she writes about Mrs. Henry, the cheerleaders, the Gabrielles, the Foremans, and the Ku Klux Klan. We already read about John Steinbeck. We think that her point of view was positive because he wrote about her experiences and he put them in his book so that people could know about Ruby's struggles and learn from them in years to come. I want to see if you can figure out whether her point of view is positive or negative for these other individuals or groups that are listed. So scholars, once you finish reading about these individuals, and also annotating about her point of view, you're going to synthesize, that means put all of your thoughts together and complete the race response in perfect race. Don't forget to snap a picture of your neat work and email it or text it to your teachers. Scholars, you've got this. Don't forget to use the steps.